Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the second of Kaiko Systems 2025 webinar series. This one is all about RightShip RISQ 3.1. My name is Taz Bachu, and I will be hosting this webinar alongside my colleague Nick Vaughan. Before we get into introductions, just a few housekeeping tips and tricks. You'll notice that we're using a new tool to the one that we previously used for our webinars. And so things may be in a different part of the screen that you're used to. If you look to the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to chat and ask questions and interact with both Nick and I throughout the course of the webinar. Please do share your questions. There will be moments throughout the webinar that will give us an opportunity to answer those and address those in more detail. Throughout the webinar as well, there will be some polls and some questions being pushed to you. They will pop up on your screen. Please do answer those as well. It's really important for both Nick and I to ensure that we are engaging with you and talking to the topics that are top of mind and on your desk right now. Moving on, just a quick introduction to myself. So if you are new to the Kaiko webinar series, my name is Taz Bachu. I'm VP Global Sales here at Kaiko Systems. I've been with the organization now for just under 3 years. It feels like a lifetime. Prior to that, my background was in B2B software as a service. So I've had experience within the maritime tech space, but I've also helped organizations in fintech, in human capital management, and in marketing embark on a digital transformation journey and really drive their organizations forwards by embracing digital technology. I'm also joined by my colleague, Nick Vaughan. Nick is our head of maritime, but I will stop talking and let him introduce himself to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Taz, and good morning to you all. For those of you that have joined our webinars before, you're probably familiar with who I am, but for those new, my name's Nick, Head of Maritime here at Kaiko. My background is on the technical side, so a great complement here with Taz. So I previously spent 12 years with Lloyd's Register, originally as a new construction surveyor in Japan, existing ship surveyor in China, and then moved into digital products and account management. Here at Kaiko, I head up the team of maritime experts. So we have both ex-seafarers, ex-superintendents sitting left and right of me, and collectively we bring the maritime expertise internally. And really looking forward today to share a bit more about RightShip RISQ 3.1 and our new product in that area.
Thanks, Nick. And before we jump into the topic in hand and start talking a little bit more about RightShip RISQ 3.1, I think it's really important to maybe touch on the theme and the golden thread that we have in our webinar series, which is really regulatory change. And it seems like the maritime industry right now is really riding that wave of regulatory change, whether it's with the wet fleet or the dry fleet. And actually, organizations and governing bodies are actually leveraging the use of technology to, I think, in some instances, drive that digitization across the maritime industry. What we're going to be speaking about today is the new RightShip questionnaire, so RISQ version 3.1, and we're also going to be taking you through some of the notable changes. So what does that actually mean for you? What does that actually mean for your specific fleets? We will then kind of uncover the key challenges and problem areas, but provide you with an insight into how Kaiko Systems would propose organizations like your own solve those challenges and really highlight those problems before they are recorded by an inspector. We'll then wrap the webinar up and we will move on to any questions. So without further ado, Nick, I will hand over to you to talk about the notable changes and enhancements.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Taz. And yeah, as Taz outlined, the focus here really is on the RightShip RISQ 3.1 questionnaire. So this has been out in the industry now for over a year, but I think this is quite an interesting time to talk about this because we have some forthcoming changes that we'll touch on later in the age triggers. So more vessels are going to become applicable for these types of inspections. But let's first look at what's changed now with 3.1. So it's a much expanded questionnaire. So we have additional sections now covering all different types of fuels. So both, what's available today, but also future proofing for alternative fuels in the future. So that's an expanded chapter 7. So we have now chapter 7 A to D covering oil, LNG as a fuel, methanol, ammonia. And I think this really shows the kind of industry shift. And whilst there might not be many vessels currently operating on future fuels or alternative fuels, this really shows the kind of change that's coming in the future and that preparation in advance of that. So, we've got the conventional fuels covered now, but we also have future fuels also covered as and when these become more common within the industry. If we look forward now into chapter 8, we have a much expanded section for cargo operations, and it's much more detailed based on each specific ship type or cargo type. So we now have sections A to E, which have vessel specific cargo checklists, covering grain, containers, general cargo, self-unloaders, etc. So again, we see this expanded scope, but also more focus on specific different areas. And again, this reflects the risks that are unique to the different types of cargo. So again, broadening the scope, but also making it more detailed for each specific type. As with what we saw, yeah, sorry, go for it, Taz.
Sorry, Nick, I've got a question for you. So we've kind of walked through some of the changes and enhancements, and you mentioned that the scope has been broadened, but why do you think that's important now? And why should the industry kind of sit up and listen to some of these changes?
Yeah, I think this kind of shows a renewed focus on the detail here, right? So the increase in breadth shows that there's an additional scope of inspection. So as we said, whether that's on the fuel type or the cargo type, etc., or as we'll touch on in a second, the human factors. But it also shows the refinement and the more detail and focus in these areas as well. So moving away from a generic checklist, making it much more specific based on the vessel specific arrangement, the specifics of the cargo operation, and what the crew need to be familiar with on board as well. So I think just moving on. So I think we have here focusing not only on the increased scope, but now moving on to the key challenges here. But I think that increased scope means, a broader area that the crew need to be familiar with and prepared for in advance of the vetting inspection. There's a much higher standard of documentation. So, additional documentation that needs to be prepared in advance of the vetting inspection and have that available for the inspector when it's on board. And as we talked about briefly there with the human factors, really the crew being able to demonstrate their competency. So it's not just about the condition of the vessel, it's not just about the process you have in place, but it's also really, are the crew, the human factor there, competent and able to, be familiar with their role and their responsibilities and communicate that effectively with the vetting inspector. Maybe at that stage, Pat, do we want to launch our first poll?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the poll should be popping up on your screens very, very shortly. Another question for you, Nick. They are coming in, but with the challenges the industry is facing in terms of crewing and in terms of getting the right people for crews and onboard vessels, what is the kind of the risks that you see for that kind of level of crew competency over the next kind of 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, so I think a big element here is, as I mentioned, is the kind of crew's familiarity with the company procedures and how that affects their specific role and area of responsibility on board, right? And as always, there's constant crew changes on board. So it might be that you have new crew members within the organization or new crew members on that specific vessel, and they might not have had the opportunity to complete a vetting inspection before. So it's really important that every time a vetting inspection takes place or it is planned, that all of the crew on board that vessel have sufficient, time and material to be able to prepare themselves. And what we see as the biggest challenge currently is, as we mentioned, the scope of inspection, but being able to tailor it in a way that each crew member knows exactly what their area of their role and responsibility is and has the specific information that they need to be able to prepare accordingly in advance of the vetting inspection.
Nice one, thank you. And just so people are aware, back to a little bit of housekeeping, what you will see on the bottom right of your screens is a button that says polls. The first poll is already live. The question is, are you already doing RightShip inspections? We are seeing votes trickle in, currently at a 65-35 split, yes to no. and we'll keep going and see what we get to in a moment. But I think, Nick, one of the things you mentioned obviously is that competency level and the ability to kind of be able to follow instructions and guidance whilst we wait for the next, a few votes from the polls to trickle in. Do you want to kind of talk about the impact of that in conjunction with that documentation and the evidence burden that the RightShip have introduced?
Yeah, sure. So now RightShip have the hybrid inspection model. So there's elements of information that can be submitted before the inspection, and then other elements that are completed on board whilst the vetting inspector is on board. So this predicates that the company and the crew must be prepared in advance of the inspection. All of the documentation, all of that evidence must be in place, and a big element of that must be submitted prior to the inspection. Also, when we look at things like electronic certificates, plus survey statuses, all of this information needs to be prepared in advance. And it's critical that the crew on board have this information available, are familiar with how to access it, and can be able to show that to the vetting inspector when they're on board. And I think it's really key to point out that if any of this evidence is missing, this could be the cause for a high risk finding on board, right? So preparation is key to make sure that the information is available, crew won't know where it is, and they can share that with the vetting inspector either in advance or when they're on board the vessel. I think, moving on, another key challenge here, as we talked about, was the crew familiarity. So as we mentioned, there's a big emphasis here on human factors or crew familiarity, right? And we've got a few elements here of particularly high-risk operations, whether we're looking at ECDIS, enclosed-based entry, mooring equipment, and this emergency drills. These are areas, and as we'll see later, these are areas that are common for high-risk findings. So it's really key that the crew are able to demonstrate the procedures, not just show where the procedures are stored, but really be able to demonstrate, how they are applied in practice, and be able to show the evidence of, where the drills have been completed, and have evidence of what's been done in the past.
Brilliant. So just kind of giving some updates. So we have a 2/3 majority on the webinar today are already doing RightShip inspections, and a third are not. That poll will be open for a little bit longer. So again, if you've not engaged with it, please do let us know if you are doing inspections at the moment, as we move on to talking a little bit more about the extended scope.
Yeah, so I touched on this at the beginning, but as we mentioned, there's a much expanded scope in the RISQ 3.1 questionnaire, and really making the cargo specific sections under Chapter 8, which means the company's procedures also need to be cargo specific. And as we draw that link between procedures and the human factor, the crews also need to be familiar with this and understand what the different hazards are in accordance with the IMSBC code and the different cargoes there. And not only what the hazards are, but what the associated equipment would be in relation to those different cargoes. So we see here things like, the water ingress system, bilge alarms, and these must really align with the operational use on board. So again, procedures, crew implementation and familiarity with these procedures, and also documented evidence to show, where the procedures are being followed and how this is being recorded. So we're seeing a common theme here, right? And I think this runs throughout the RightShip vetting process, but it's that link between not just the procedures in their documented form, but also the crew being able to implement them, and the documentary evidence to show what's been done in the past and the results and records, etc. of those. So moving on, I think we touched a lot there on the process and the people side of things. And again, I think now we look more at what RightShip would call the plant or hardware side of things, right? So a much higher scrutiny on both the deck equipment, and also on the safety systems. So we're looking at things here like mooring winches, accommodation ladders, pilot ladders, and not just the condition of these, but also the documentation that sits behind them. So certificates, and also all of the manufacturer's information, and particularly when we look at things like lifeboats, rescue boat davits, really having the load test records, right? So again, it's not just about the equipment, it also links together the procedures and the records of what's been done on board. And as we see here, frequently issues are being detected with missed maintenance intervals, or also certificates being out of date. So again, it's really key that all of these elements are covered, both from procedures, documentation, certification, etc. So it's much more, as we mentioned, with that broader scope, much more holistic overview.
So I think just to take stock on where we are, there's going to be changes to the inspection regime and the inspection program. And I think actually there's going to be more emphasis placed on crews to provide that documentary evidence, but also to ensure that actually the deck equipment, the safety systems and the processes on board the vessel are working as efficiently and as safely as possible. I think in the tech world, we talk about kind of process, people and product. But what I kind of like is the similarity we can draw to essentially what RightShip are looking for at the moment. They're looking at process, they're looking at people, ergo the crew, but also plant. So Nick, I will hand back over to you to kind of walk through some of these statistics.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, right? Like it's all about process, people, plant, or, for those of you that operate mixed fleets with both tankers and bulkers, you can see the similarities or the analogies here with what OCIMF call hardware, hardware being plant, process and human, right? So, we're seeing very common themes here, both that was originally within the wet fleet, now similar themes being brought across to the dry fleet as well. And these were some really interesting statistics published actually by RightShip through the period 2023 to 2024. So we saw 66,000 total findings reported across the vetting inspections that were completed. And we can see a kind of divide there about where these findings were reported, so what they relate to. So, process, about 52%, so the majority there. So again, that's looking at the procedures, that cover the relevant areas of onboard operations. People, 21,000 findings. So, really looking at the crew onboard, whether it's what we call the human factor or crew familiarity here, so whether that's gaps in their training, lack of familiarization, or really lack of understanding of the implementation of those procedures. And then plant, hardware, you can think of the ship's arrangement and equipment, about 26,000 findings, 40% there. So this is really related to maintenance, so the physical condition of the vessel and all of the machinery on board.
Now, before we give you an insight into the high-risk findings, there is another poll. So if you click on the polls button on the right-hand side of your screens, the question is, on average, how many findings have you had in previous RightShip inspections? There is no right or wrong answer for this, but there are a number of options. So 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, and 20 plus. It's worth reminding everyone that other attendees cannot see how you answer on the polls. This is, again, just a talking point and will enable kind of Nick and myself to kind of look at how we present some of this information to you as we go through the webinar. That poll is now live. And again, the question is, on average, how many findings have you had in previous RightShip inspections? Whilst people answer that poll, we will kind of walk through the high-risk findings per risk section.
Yeah, brilliant. So likewise, again, touching on some more information that was shared by RightShip. And again, the focus here really is on the high-risk findings that have been reported in accordance with these RightShip vetting inspections. And, we see these very clearly related to some of the key challenges that we saw earlier. So, the largest number, 11.6% reported for general appearance, hull and superstructure. So that's section 14. And, again, this visual condition of the vessel. So again, related, whether that's main deck and the equipment, etc. Next up was the ISM system. So section 4, 10.2. We can think about this in terms of the safety of the vessel. So LSA and FFE, both the equipment condition, but also maintenance testing drills. So again, we see that common thread that we discussed earlier. Next up, section 9A, which is hatch covers and lifting appliances. So again, equipment that's there on the main deck, the large hatch covers and all of the equipment that's associated with those. And in fourth place, section 3, the navigation equipment. So again, bridge equipment, so not just the equipment that's on board the bridge, but also the procedures, the documentation, and again, the crew familiarity with that. So again, we see these common themes. And this hopefully gives you a bit more of an idea of where those high risk findings lie.
And the results of the poll are in. So we've had a number of you respond to some of the questions and provide some information for us. So 42% of you have had upwards of 20 findings in previous RightShip inspections on average. 21% have had between 5 to 10. 21% have had between 15 to 20. 8% of you have had 0 to 5, and 8% of you have had between 10 to 15. And I think that kind of correlates with something that we'll show you in the next slide in terms of kind of the age of the fleet. But that does also kind of lead us on to the next poll very, very shortly as well. Nick, you've kind of spoken about these high-risk findings, so I won't dwell on this slide a little bit too much. But I think, you know, as Nick mentioned, with this slide here, you can see the kind of the risk section, and you can see kind of the ISM systems, mooring operations, etc. Those that had the highest percentage of total findings on the previous slide, you can kind of see those findings quantified there. So 558 and 506 being the top two. But I think something we're seeing is that actually the updated ages are going to probably yield a little bit more in terms of problem areas and findings. And before I kind of hand back over to Nick, the next question and the next poll, which will be pushed to you very shortly, is what is the average age of your fleet? So again, in that polls button on the bottom right hand side, what is the average age of your fleet? Again, no right or wrong answer here, but the options you have are 0 to 5 years old, 5 to 10 years old, 10 to 15 years old, 15 to 20 years old, or 20 plus years old. But Nick, kind of a question for you on this. What do you think the correlation is between the age of a vessel and the number of findings or the number of issues that a crew may identify whilst conducting a pre-vetting inspection for RightShip?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of relatively clear and obvious that as the age of the vessel increases, there's, you know, a higher number of expected issues to be found on board, both just with general wear and tear on board the vessel, but you know, of course, there's exceptions to every rule. So you know, you could have a problematic younger vessel. Likewise, you can have a very well maintained and very well trained crew on an older vessel. But of course, I would say you kind of have a bell kind of clear curve and distribution there. What's interesting now that RightShip clarified in December last year is this new age triggers, basically, and this is going to see a much larger number of vessels now being sort of applicable for RightShip inspections, you know, coming up in the future. So we can see here the staggered age range, and really by 2027, vessels over 10 years old will now be relevant for RightShip inspections. And I think it's really important here to clarify that any vessels that haven't completed their inspections as per these age gates will immediately see their safety scores downgraded from, you know, to 2 out of 5. So that's kind of, if you do nothing, then there will be kind of negative implication there. So it's really key to be aware of this in relation to the age of your vessels, and then to understand and prepare early to avoid any issues.
Thanks, Nick. So we've kind of come to that point in the webinar where we talk about kind of what we would do and how Kaiko would kind of address this. But I think before we jump into that, a couple of questions from the audience, from the room. So a question's come in that asks, if a seafarer can't demonstrate a procedure when asked, will it be marked as a negative observation? Is this human-centric approach similar to SIRE 2, where practical understanding is as important as procedural knowledge?
Yeah, exactly. I think we're seeing that shift, right? Like we saw it previously with OCIP's change to SIRE 2. I think we're seeing the same shift now in RightShip. So it's not just about having the SMS and all of the procedures on board. Of course, that's something that's covered more on the process side of things, but you know, the people side of things is really, are the crew familiar with that? And I think it's important to state there that, of course, if they're not familiar, that is or could be the cause for a finding there, right? And of course, it depends on the area and the severity of it, but it kind of illustrates and demonstrates how key it is that the crew are familiar with those procedures and can communicate that effectively during the vetting inspection.
Got you. Thank you for that. So, Kaiko obviously is all about simplification and making data and information incredibly accessible and very easy to collect when crews are on board vessels. And I think the maritime team at the organisation have kind of identified problems based on some of the research you've presented today, but also some proposed solutions. So I think, Nick, if you were to kind of highlight your top two from this slide, which would be the two that you would perhaps speak about?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the main ones here is the high number of findings leading to lost charters, right? Like if you have issues on board the vessel, from a technical perspective, it can have very clear, commercial implications there. So, our approach there is the guided self-assessments in line with vessel-specific, rank-specific, really with a focus on reducing this number of findings. And I think really also is the crew focus, right? The questionnaire is published. Of course, you could give that to the crew as a PDF or maybe in an Excel format, but that's just very broad scope, tons of pages, tons of information. So it's really what should the crew focus on? So again, our approach there is you should rank specific questions to allow them to prepare individually in line with their role and responsibility.
And I think with that crew focus, there's a number of features that we've obviously developed over a number of years that really kind of allow the crew to better access that information and better conduct those inspections. And I think they're kind of highlighted here at a glance on the screen. But I think if we were to perhaps look at these features combined with some of the benefits, I think there's it's kind of chalk and cheese as to the current way and method of operating, but also what the kind of proposed solution would be as well. And again, I think just based on some of the things that you've highlighted there in terms of things being lost to charter, but also that crew focus, what are the benefits of kind of using a simplified and perhaps more digital solution to capture that data?
Yeah, exactly. So I think we can start at the highest level, having that overview of your fleet and having a standardized way that each vessel within your fleet and each crew member prepares, right? So not just giving them the PDF document, but giving them something that's tailored specifically to them. So giving them sufficient time to prepare in advance in a structured way where your short team can have overview, removing this manual element of whether it's PDFs, Excel sheets, and endless emails going back and forth. So, using Kaiko's mobile first digital workflow not only simplifies the process, but also gives you that very clear overview. The fact that it can be used on board on our mobile app, so it can be used completely offline across multiple devices, really giving each crew member the ability to prepare when they need to in their own time, anywhere on board the vessel. The rank specific questions, so they prepare specifically what's relevant to them, so whether that's right down to, we're looking at even cook, messman, fitter, they know exactly what they need to be prepared for in advance. And then when we think about the link to the shore side, the shore team having the web-based dashboard, having the full fleet overview of the current status, but being able to focus on individual vessels and where they are. But really, big thing for us is the collaboration. So collaboration between ship and shore, really having that clear overview of what the issues are on board, how these can be managed and rectified in advance of the vetting inspection.
So I think it's fair to say it's the kind of 5Ps principle, which is proper preparation prevents poor performance. And I think the slide kind of articulates all of the benefit areas that kind of phrase can offer to an organisation. But I think most importantly, it's the time saving, the ship to shore alignment, but also the fact that crews can do this anywhere at any time throughout their kind of workflow. Now, before we kind of jump into a live demo and before we start kind of talking about what this looks like in practice, there is that preparation timeline. And I think a few of you have asked questions about timelines and deadlines. And essentially this slide kind of walks through the steps and the process an individual would go through in order to access the kind of the risk inspection and the risk kind of preparation that we have on the web dashboard and the mobile app. Nick, what I might do is hand over to you to kind of start the demo, and then we can kind of walk through this timeline in real time as well.
Yeah, sure. So kind of maybe just to summarize, what we'll show you now in the demo is both the mobile app that the crew are using on board and the dashboard that the shore team in the office would be using to have that overview. And this obviously gives you that very clear overview in terms of the timeline. We haven't put specific, time on here because, the solution is built to be very flexible, enables you to not only, do the preparation in very short time where you don't have much time available, and obviously in an idealized situation, you allow the crew more time. And as you can see in the mobile app, they then have more time to do that preparation and familiarize themselves with what needs to be done.
Brilliant, Nick. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but also test your multitasking capabilities. So we have had a few questions pop through whilst we've been pitching kind of our proposed solution, the features and the benefits. So I think the first question is, what would be the effect of this new RightShip system to old ships, especially with ships 15 to 20 years old? Is there any effect on the vessel commercially?
I mean, the effect on the vessel commercially would be, the implication of not doing a RightShip vetting inspection would impact your safety score. And also, if a RightShip inspection is carried out with a high number of findings, that could potentially jeopardize the commercial trading of the vessel. So, twofold problems there.
This is quite a good question as well. Is there any scope of positive observation during a RightShip inspection similar to Sire 2?
Great question. As I understand currently, the findings really focus on the issues that are found on board, and there's not a kind of mechanism in the same way with Sire as the positive observations. But I think that's probably something that we will see change and evolve in the near future.
Final one from me before I let you carry on with the demo. Since many questions will be answered using the Kaiko Systems RISQ module, how can the office, so in this instance, I presume the shore team, ensure that they've been correctly understood and answered? Does this create an additional verification burden for the office side? And I feel like you'll answer this question through your demo, but perhaps preface an answer, and then we can kind of jump into showing that in practice.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, it's easier to show that live, but just as a kind of brief summary, we have for the human type questions, multiple choice quiz type questions that allow immediate assessment and verification. So in other words, if the crew answer it wrong, the shore team are notified and can then see exactly for themselves any gaps there in the human knowledge where additional training or guidance may be required.
Perfect. There have been a couple of other questions, but we will get to them as we go through the demo, because I think there's some relevant questions there, but also quite keen to kind of show some of the answers in practice.
Yeah, brilliant. So let's jump into the demo here. So what you're looking at on the screen now is our mobile application. So as we kind of briefly outlined earlier, this runs within the same architecture of our system. So the mobile app running on board, the web-based dashboard for the shore team to use, and this all being underpinned, with our AI technology as well. So first we'll look at the app. So this is used by the crew on board, runs on any mobile device. So I have it here in the office just running on a tablet, but you could run it on a mobile phone. Fundamentally, it runs offline. So once it's downloaded, the crew can really use it anywhere on board the vessel. And also it can be run on as many devices as you want on board. So all of the crew can be using this concurrently, and the results are just compiled as and when they are uploaded. So it really gives you maximum flexibility on board, both in terms of the hardware you use and people being able to use it. The crew will log in and they each create their profile. So as we see here, each crew member has the ability to create their profile, and each profile is linked to a rank, which allows us to then generate the rank specific question set. So if we log in here as our third officer, we can see that we see the chapters that are relevant to the third officer. In this case, the ISM system, big chunk here with the LSA, FFE, the safety equipment. So if we log in here, we can see the different areas. And as we saw in one of the high risk questions or high risk findings before, we have the lifeboat. And what we've done here is to take each RightShip question and make it actionable for the crew and break it down into a subset of questions covering the process, the people, and the plant, so hardware, process, and human. We have guidance for each question, which not only outlines the full question text from the RightShip inspection questionnaire, but also gives all of the guidance information that was provided. So again, giving the crew all the information they need in the palm of their hand. And we also give you the ability to add your SMS procedures as well. So giving that clear link between the RightShip question set and your company procedures. And this is something where we can add a reference, hyperlinks, text, etc., but really allow the crew to understand how these procedures link to the relevant questions and do that preparation in advance. So as I mentioned, we have a number of different question types. And I think just to touch on one of the questions that was asked before, where we have the human element, we have these quiz type questions. So this allows the crew to do this test on board and have immediately verified answers. So we can see here in relation to the lifeboat release system, the crew are able to select and submit their answer, and we'll see in the dashboard how that's immediately verified. We can also see in different questions, for instance, with the photos, so where you want to see the condition on board, so please attach a photo of the lifeboat's release system. We can see the example picture, for instance, so they can understand what it should look like, and then the crew need to take a picture live on the device. So we can see here in the office, they can take a picture. So these pictures have to be taken live in the application. So you as the shore team know that's exactly what the condition was at the time of the inspection. We also have much simpler yes/no questions. And if the crew want to report a finding, it's very easy. For instance, if we say here, servicing in accordance with the manufacturer's guidelines, if there was an issue here, it's very easy for the crew to report the issue on board. So we could say last service overdue. So again, very easy to capture any issues on board and share that information directly with the shore team. So we can see here in this way, there's a full set of questions covering all of the relevant areas in line with the RightShip risk questionnaire. Again, another high risk question here with the accommodation ladders. So again, this was an issue with a high number of findings. And we can see here within the Kaiko application, how the crew would be able to prepare more effectively, covering all of the different elements. So again, we see process, people, plant, the quiz type people questions, also covering the process, the procedures, and the hardware in terms of the actual equipment on board. Prepare themselves, capture that information on board, report any issues, and therefore prevent these findings being reported on board. So in this way, they can do a very easy preparation, including capturing dates of when, for instance, equipment was serviced, when drills were carried out, etc. Capture all of the relevant information in line with the requirements. And also not only making this rank specific, but we also want to make it easy for the crew to do the preparation and focus on board. So we have a number of different filters. So whether they want to just focus on the hardware, human or process side of things, so maybe they just want to focus on preparing themselves with the people element and the familiarization. This immediately tailors the question set to show just the people questions. So, those quiz type questions so they can do the preparation. At the same time, maybe where time is short on board, they just want to cover, for instance, the high risk questions first. So again, we have high, medium, and low categorization for the questions. Again, these are just tools that allow the crew to filter this question set, reduce the number of questions, and also allow them to prepare in accordance with where they are aboard the vessel. So making it location specific, whether they want to prepare, for instance, just the questions in relation to the bridge when they're there or out on the main deck. Again, they're able to use the filters within the application to tailor the question set and prepare more efficiently and more effectively. That was obviously a very quick run through on the dashboards, on the app side of things. As I mentioned, this is all running offline. When the crew have done any element of preparation, it's very easy for them to then connect to the internet on board and upload. And I think that's a great point to jump across to the web-based dashboard where the shore team can then have this overview and start to take action based on the information that's been uploaded. So maybe just whilst I switch, is there any questions?
So many questions. How long does it take to implement Kaiko RISQ across a fleet?
Yeah, great question. So we set each vessel up specifically based on the vessel's equipment and arrangement. So it's really tailored, and that's something that can be done for a vessel within 24 hours. So we really focus on speed of implementation to allow your crew to get up and using the system as quickly as possible.
And then next question is, in addition to guided self-assessments, to what degree would Kaiko's vessel health, AI, and other predictive analytics capabilities help ship owners identify potential problems proactively?
Well, great and very broad question, which I'll try and answer as quickly and succinctly as possible. So, what we're looking at here specifically is our RightShip RISQ module. This is very tailored and focused in line with the RightShip RISQ 3.1 questionnaire, but we have a much broader spectrum of modules and use cases that can be tailored to different inspections on board. Ultimately, the more use cases, within Kaiko, I would say you're able to have a much more holistic overview of the vessel's condition and ultimately a better understanding of any issues that allows you to then manage these more effectively. So whether it's ballast tank inspections, safety inspections, preparation for port state, etc., we have a broad spectrum of offerings to assist in those areas as well.
And for the rank-specific questions, what ranks are included?
We have a full set of ranks on board across both officers, so deck, engine officers, including ratings, etc. So yeah, we have all of the ranks on board the vessel covered.
There is a kind of technical setup question, which I'll try and summarize here, but the question is a statement and then a question. I believe this application is intended to be used on each person's personal phone. Will the account be ship-specific or user-specific? This is important because I presume the Shore team, aim to measure individual performance using accurate KPIs. I think that's a great question. So just to kind of run through this one. So many organizations that we work with provide each vessel with a mobile device. And as we're aware, not every inspection, not every vetting inspection or pre-assessment takes place at the same time. So individual crew members can take that device, conduct their respective parts of the inspection under that rank profile that Nick has kind of identified. So in short, there will be a vessel or ship specific account, and as per that account, each crew member will have a rank specific profile under that. And again, we can deal with kind of crew changes through our kind of setup and implementation, but conscious of time, we're on the final stretch. We've probably got around 5 minutes left. We'll go into that in a bit more detail after this call. So if that was your question and you're interested, get in touch with us and book a meeting. Nick, back over to you.
Yeah, brilliant. So maybe just to kind of close the loop, as it were, we saw the crew doing their preparation on board. Each crew member creates their own profile, assigns their rank, completes their questions, not only provides kind of evidence of the vessel's condition and the procedures, etc., but also prepares themselves for the people element there with the quiz type questions. You as the Shore team have full overview of this in the web-based dashboard. So you have your fleet overview to see kind of the status of your vessels and be able to plan the vetting inspections and the preparation. And you can see then for each individual vessel, the full summary of that vetting preparation period. So you have the ability to set the period. So, enable the crew to do this preparation in advance. And once that's set up, the crew are then enabled to do this preparation. So again, that's where we have that flexibility. You can set it up in a very short time or give the crew a much longer window, to allow them to prepare, especially with the human element over a longer period of time. You always have a very clear summary of your findings. So a breakdown by the area. So to understand, do the issues lie with the vessel's structure and equipment, maybe with your procedures or with the crew competency, and also an indication of the risk status. So are these high risk findings, medium or low? So you always have this summary, a full table of all of the findings. And I think maybe to kind of close that question or kind of summarize the question that's asked earlier, for the human element, you can really see on these quiz type questions, the automatic verification. So where a crew member got this question wrong. And then you have the ability here to set a deadline. So again, focusing on the action that you can take to follow up. So, when this needs to be, rectified or dealt with. So setting deadlines, also adding comments. So additional and enable you to communicate directly with the crew here. So again, removing that element of back and forth on email, focus specifically on the issues and the follow-up directly with the crew. Yeah, Taz.
Apologies for cutting you off there, but really good questions just come in. How do you measure financial returns? I think this answer is how long is a piece of string, but what are some of the things that organizations will be looking for if they use a solution like this?
Yeah, I think the ultimate tracker here is kind of the results from the vetting inspection. So preparing properly in advance and enabling your crew to prepare reduces the risk of having high risk findings and the number of findings on board. Ultimately, therefore, a better performance in your vetting inspection, and therefore ultimately increasing the potential for charters or reducing the risk of losing a charter. And I think that then becomes your ultimate kind of metrics that you would be measuring there.
Awesome, thank you for that. So we are almost at time. I think, Nick, that demo was super insightful. And I think maybe just to reiterate, the first part of the demo, you showed the mobile application, so that kind of online application that's also offline ready, so that crews can kind of assess the risk questionnaire and really kind of access those pre-inspection questions to ensure that they have that knowledge, but also to ensure that the people and process are ready for that inspection. We've touched on rank specific questions as well. So again, covering that broad spectrum and that increased scope of the new RightShip 3.1. We have just seen the live fleet dashboard and how that kind of enables that collaborative workflow between ship and shore. But I think the resounding thing here is that simplified element to that compliance piece. Yes, the new process is a little more complex. Yes, the new process increases the scope. Yes, the new process looks at human factors and it includes the entire crew. But again, the kind of proposal and the way of working that we've proposed simplifies that to ensure that every person knows what they're doing and how they need to do it to ensure a minimization of those findings. There have been lots and lots of comments on various kind of improvements or things that people would like to see on the application as well. So I think one thing I will say is thank you very much for those kind of feature enhancement suggestions. Our VP of product, Martin, is also watching the chat very closely. So I am sure that he has noted those down. In the interest of time, I'm only going to stick to the questions that are asked. But I think final question, Nick, is the app available in multiple languages or is it in English only at the moment?
Yeah, currently the app is only available in English. And we have done language-specific customization in the past. So I think, as Taz mentioned, if there's something that's of interest, please reach out. We'll follow up with you directly to understand the need there.
Brilliant. I have taken 3 extra minutes of your time, but I believe it was justified because Nick was showing some amazing stuff on the platform. You will get sent a copy of this webinar as a recording, but also a link to engage with either Nick, myself, or the team if you want to learn more. One of the things that we are offering the attendees of this webinar and anybody that's watching this webinar on demand is access to a pilot to trial this on board some of your vessels. We have really enjoyed speaking to you. We've really enjoyed presenting this element of the Kaiko system suite of products. We will be back in June for another webinar. Look out for that and please make sure that you register for that one as well. All that's left for me to say is thank you very much, Nick, for your insights and the information that you presented to all of the attendees today. And thank you to everyone that attended. We will see you in June. Have a great rest of your day.